Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking national political news of the day. And probably the biggest news over the past couple of days has been a revelation from the FBI that with low confidence, the laboratories in China most likely, I don't know what that means, low confidence and most likely, but most likely the COVID virus basically leaked out of a lab. What they were doing with it is a lot of speculation, but this, of course, has energized the theories, that this was some type of deliberate germ warfare by the Chinese government, or at least that they've been covering up. China is calling the allegations ridiculous, but the FBI has taken the stance. They haven't provided a lot of details, at least that I've seen, but they have concluded that it was more likely than not, with low confidence, that it was a leak. And this is a very, dangerous thing to say. We've got a lot of violence against Asians because, we have the Wuhan virus talk. And so this is kind of explosive. It's also energizing the Republican investigations. They want to know more. They want to know what the U.S. government covered up. I think they said that initially and then forgot that Trump was the president at the time. But anyway, Dave, you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. So this is one of those instances where a little bit of time has passed and suddenly we're getting more nuanced information, and that is it's catching up with some of the things people have been saying all along. So, for example, just to refresh people's memory, there was that Wade article. It's called the Wade article. I forgot the journal that it was published in, but basically the writer went into pretty minute detail about the actual genetic code of the virus to illustrate that people who understand these things at the very deepest and highest levels recognize a particular piece of the DNA that is a common element used in this gain of function testing and research. And so the Wade article just points out that if we are going to suspend our disbelief for a minute and just look at the facts, that it's just as likely, if not more likely, that it leaked from the lab because of the virus's DNA itself. So that's one of those things that was kind of like banned from talking about.
Real quickly, Dave, you're thinking of Nicholas Wade, who wrote an article for the New York Times, not a conservative conspiracy theory site, but so I just wanted to clarify that. If you want to find it, you can find it on the New York Times.
It's been a long time since I read it, and I think I read about it in a journal, and then maybe, like you said, there was other publication of it in the New York Times. There you go. Thank you for doing that. So this is just one of those instances where, that's what I'm getting at, is that there's this sort of meta issue about the things that could be discussed in polite company, air quotes, things that the algorithms and the social media entities were kind of flagging as misinformation, disinformation. And then you could kind of take the ripples out from there, and how just generally speaking, the overall mainstream media covered things. And again, like I said, political discourse was very divided. So I think that was the reason I mentioned that, is because, just to point out what actually happened this week, the Department of Energy researchers and FBI researchers, have gone out and said that they think that, although they weren't confident, that evidence points more towards that direction than the other, which was the natural sort of, it evolved.
The bat thing, yeah.
Yes, exactly that. So that's that. Like, there are a couple different ways to go from here, but of course there are other pieces of the U.S. intelligence community that did not make this claim or this change, and then also other government bodies too, still sticking with the animal evolution theory. So this is something that you and I talked about way back then. which was just kind of big picture across all of the controversial elements of COVID politics, we'll call it, whether it's vaccines or whether it's masks or whether it's the origin. To my mind, the entire exercise was viewed as a public health emergency. And it reminds me, I like, for the sake of illustration, I like to point to the atomic weapons scare, where children were taught about duck and cover in school, knowing, all the scientists, all the intelligence experts, all the political leadership, everybody knows that singing a song and hiding under your desk isn't going to protect you from a nuclear war. Put your hands over your head, lean up against the wall, not going to protect you from a nuclear war. But our country decided at the time, for the sake of the psychological well-being of the public, that that's what they were going to tell everybody. So I equate what happened, or I have been over the last few years, what happened in our country and around the world, to be honest, with a similar decision for the sake of public health. And so that emergency has been deemed to be over, whether it's exactly a few months ago or a few months from now, depending on the program or the level of government or the case that's in front of the Supreme Court. The various arguments are being made that this emergency is effectively in its waning days, and I think that's why this alternative narrative is now being sort of seeing the light of day. So that's kind of my big picture take on this. But then you and I, this show's about national politics. So I think it's really important. I'll say this one last thing. And
sure, but before we get to that, I do want to just intervene, because there was a World Health Organization investigation that said it was extremely unlikely to have come from a lab. But even who is conceding that was based on the information available at the time, and there's a lot more information now, and that WHO does not take a stand on these new revelations because they don't have any basis other than what's being reported in the media. And I also need to say that the conflict between low confidence and most likely, the FBI is saying most likely, the Department of Energy scientists are saying low confidence, but it might be that the FBI is combining their low confidence findings with other corroborating information that makes them believe the case is a bit stronger, even if the science isn't already there. Although I would think that the science is the foundation of it, and if it's low confidence, then you still shouldn't be saying, more likely, unless, again, it just depends on how compelling the other evidence is. But I just, before we got into the politics of it, I wanted to clarify that, because it's about as clear as mud as the way it's.
Yeah. And honestly, you did remind me of a data point that's worth mentioning. There's a joint body between Harvard and MIT that had a spokesperson that was out this week kind of giving a little bit of clarity about what this new information means, to the extent that you could call it clarity. And what they said is basically a low confidence message of this nature is basically just letting us know that there's not strong evidence either way. And so if there's not strong evidence or significant evidence either way, then it becomes a much more nuanced communications issue as opposed to a raw science issue. So that actually, and because you mentioned the World Health Organization, let's go there. That's something I was going to bring up eventually, but we have to remember that the World Health Organization was really, an investigation that they did would have required cooperation from China. Right. China did say that they were going to cooperate with that investigation, but then they closed it down as soon as the World Health Organization asked for access to the lab. So it's one of those things where it's, like we talk about, there's different like three-dimensional chess going on. There's a lot of angles here. But when it comes to, like that's why I started at 30,000 feet, that the number one issue that was dealt with was we need people to take certain steps so that our hospitals don't get overwhelmed, so that we don't have fatalities occurring in nurses and doctors, and just a catastrophic cascade of events needed to be nipped in the bud. And so that's what they did. It's called like an as if protocol. They proceed as if. And then the evidence of this, obviously, and again, not to get into the hyper political nature of this, but when Dr. Fauci was on that call with his cadre of experts, that original call when this all first kind of came to a head. And you could, if you Google Jim Jordan, he's got all kinds of things that he said about this. New York Times has covered that, trying to defend the decision. But basically, on that very, very, very first call, the decision was made that we are just not going with that lab leak theory. It would impact future research. It would impact the relationship with China. It would, people's names and reputations could be at risk. It could escalate to, bio warfare claims that are unsubstantiated. There were all sorts of reasons, I would argue, strategic reasons beyond just the public health messaging. And those decisions were made, and that's above our pay grade.
And the thing we ought to also remember real quickly is that China might have completely unrelated reasons for not wanting to let Western people into that lab. They could be hiding something totally different that they're experimenting with that's not related to the virus at all. I mean, it's not like they need a whole lot of excuses to want to be cloak and dagger about it all. So.
And this, again, like, I didn't want to get super in the weeds on this, but just to pick up on what you said, it's been published. Some media outlets have published that China actually did not make available even to us information about the staffing at the time this happened, and specific details that may have led us to get a better understanding. And the truth is that could have all been classified by both us and China. We don't. Once you get into the classified realm, there's a lot that is just beyond the scope of what we're even allowed access to. So I don't want to speculate in that direction. I think it's more fun to speculate on the political side here. And because, in effect, the Financial Times had a really great article, America and the China lab leak theory, the new Cold War makes another pandemic more likely. That's the subheading of the article. And the author is Edward Luce, so you can check for yourself. But he basically goes on to say that, China does, through their behaviors, they make it look like they did have something to hide. They threatened Australia. When Australia, they arrested whistleblowers. And they shut down the World Health Organization inquiry. So they didn't do themselves any favors. And also, Xi's U-turn on COVID probably did damage their reputation. And then finally, he says that the next pandemic probably will come from China, based on their population and how different bird flus and other viruses and flus tend to come from high population areas. So based on density. So the truth is that what they're saying is that China probably didn't want to be blamed for a virus that cost 7 million lives and trillions of dollars, and a historic embarrassment to the medical research community, potentially. But that said, what his article goes on to say is that it's self-defeating because now there's a mistrust, and now there's this schism in the around the world, but even in the U.S. politics, where the left is saying that it's racist to blame China, or it's lab leak theory is just a conspiracy going back to when Trump was using xenophobic language. But on the right, they're saying this proves that China is secretive and China has it out for us. So this article really just says, Americans, where we stand depends on our politics before we even start considering the facts. So this feeds into that sort of political schism that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we also have to remember that the FBI actually reported in 2021, quote unquote, moderate confidence that it came from a lab leak. So this is not all that new. They had arrived at its conclusion for different reasons than the Department of Energy this time around. It's just that they're kind of coalescing, and the CIA has not issued a statement. They don't have a position whatsoever. And usually they're the ones who would be investigating this. And FBI is supposed to be domestic. What are they even doing on this, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting. The National Intelligence Council still says low confidence. A lot of scientists are, according to the New York Times, are still very skeptical about this, even despite the Department of Energy conclusions. But it's again, the politics of it is this has opened up a uh, a Pandora's box for these investigations, and you can bet that that's what the Republicans will probably focus on, maybe more than some of the other theories they got going.
Yeah, and I know we just have a few minutes left, but I think that, the reason we started at 30, well, I personally started at 30,000 feet and then went to geostrategic issues and then went to domestic politics is because we can anticipate the upcoming domestic politics on this. Because like I said, COVID politics as a category, as a broad category, I'm starting to hear on various independent media sources that, well, we were told certain things about vaccines, and we were told certain things about masking, and those things were single message for the sake of what we talked about, the public health emergency doctrine, but not as nuanced as we now are able to talk about, right? And so the question is, why couldn't we talk about it during the emergency? And some of the answers people are mentioning is, well, because there was a hotline between, the White House and politically connected people and social media organizations like, Google, Facebook, the rest, Twitter. So as Elon Musk's released texts and emails, I think, from Twitter revealed that there was this hotline like, hey, if you got an axe grind, then you're able to reach out and say, nope, we're not going to let people talk about this. We're going to declare it as misinformation, disinformation. And so I think that's going to be the next chapter, is how we have a more transparent and open media conversation about controversial topics of this nature.
Well, thank you, Dave. We're at the end of this segment, but I also just wanted to point out that in order for certain elements of the right to move forward on claiming that China is responsible for COVID, they've got to admit that there's COVID. And that's actually going to be a real interesting thing given all the denialism, but we will see what happens in the future.
Did you see that?
I saw it. You didn't change the lighting.
I didn't touch it. Looks alive.
Yes.
It's bigger than 2 microns.
Which means the infection is spread by a mere fraction of the green. I'm bringing down cameras. Let's have the other microscanner. Now, the next step is to find out what makes it grow. We'll need samples from the scoop to send through Max Cult for culture and isolation.
Roger, sir. In work.
Good God. It's growing.
Okay, next segment. The security videos. McCarthy, not Mitch McConnell, but completely independent of the Senate. The House Majority Leader McCarthy has basically given Tucker Carlson exclusive access to apparently all of the security videos that could possibly show exactly how Congress members managed to get to the hiding places so that the attackers of the Capitol couldn't find them. Will Tucker Carlson reveal it? Will what is the danger there? But it has become a controversy because there is a lot of concerns about the safety. Should this something like this ever happen again? The McCarthy is justifying it based on, well, the January 6th committee gave CNN exclusive videos, but they were specifically chosen videos. They didn't give them access to everything. And then to add things, McCarthy wanted to actually, in response to requests from some of the January 6th defendant lawyers, wanted to give them access to the videos. Again, the concerns are that this is going to make it very dangerous for future if this what happen again. Probably it won't. Hopefully the DC police have learned a few things, but they're concerned about this, and McCarthy is just doubling down. It does look like they're holding off on giving the footage access to the January 6th defendants, but a decision has not been made yet. But it boggles the mind because it does seem like McCarthy's being a bit reckless. And considering that Tucker Carlson pretty much just blew out any claim to be a journalist based on the Dominion paper revelations that he openly knew that people he was putting on his show were lying, complained about it, about election denial a couple of years ago. And still put him on anyway because of Fox News ratings, along with, he wasn't the only one, but he was certainly one of them. What is the justification for giving him this access? He is not a journalist. At any other time in history, he would have been, and the whole gaggle of them would have been discredited from journalism in general. It just wouldn't happen, but we live in a different era. Dave.
Yeah, so I think there's no better place to start than the motivation, right, of Speaker McCarthy and why this even happened. And I did a little digging. I was thinking, like, what's his reason? Why does he say he did it? And so there's a New York Times article where he said his reason was because he promised. He said, I was asked quote, I promised. I was asked in the press about these tapes, and I said they do belong to the American public. I think sunshine lets everybody make their own judgment. Now, if that's the case, that you have on the one hand the January 6th committee taking select pieces of footage to make the case that they were making, and then McCarthy and his party and all their supporters and sympathizers, whether inside media or not, they say, why don't we have access to this? Why can't we see if there's something we can tell a different tale? So technically, as soon as McCarthy became speaker, they could have done the same thing. They could have said, we're going to have a January 6th committee. We're going to look through the tapes and we're going to figure out what kind of narrative we could make. But I don't think that they have that expertise, or they figured the easiest way to do it was along the narrative of, let's just give it to our outsourced PR wing in the media. And it's pretty transparent, and because they gave it to no one else. So they've kind of outsourced that piece of it. And many people have been saying, well, look, all they really need to do to make this right is just let everybody have it. But he also said, at first there were 14,000 hours. We thought, but really there's 43,000 hours. And we're not just giving it all away. We're actually scrutinizing it with the Capitol Police Force first so that we don't reveal anything that would put us at risk. So now we've got this dueling narrative set where Democratic legislators are saying, look what you did. You gave all this stuff away. You gave away secrets. And in fact, Schumer, Senate Majority Leader Schumer, has said this is an egregious security breach, one of the worst security risks since 9/11. And finally, he said, this is Schumer, the footage Speaker McCarthy is making available to Fox News is a treasure trove of closely held information about how the Capitol complex is protected, and its public release would compromise the safety of the legislative branch and allow those who want to commit another attack to learn how Congress is safeguarded. So that's like the two lanes. One is, look what you did. You revealed our House secrets, and now our Capitol itself is at risk eternally because of this. So there's, McCarthy saying it's really not that bad. We're reviewing it, and this is the right thing to do. And so the question is it a security risk? Is it public information, or somewhere in between? And I think that it's pretty obvious that it's somewhere in between.
Yeah, because it depends on what. I mean, if for those, a recap of what happened on January 6th is that the place was stormed and people were moved very quickly. The congressional representatives and their staff were moved very quickly, and the Capitol attackers were frustrated. They're screaming, "Where's Nancy? Where are they? Why is this not happening?" Because there are apparently corridors that allow people to go into places where they can hide. It was probably designed that way. And when somebody finally got close enough, a woman got shot and killed because that was because they were getting pretty close. But this was a real dangerous thing, and we were just very lucky that no congressperson was hurt or even killed. And so, if it's to happen again, or some type of Handmaid's Tale scenario where actually weapons are involved, this is a potentially dangerous thing. I guess it depends on what footage we're talking about. Yeah. They've already released footage of people in their hiding places because apparently being in the room doesn't reveal where they are in the building, in terms of how to get there. We've seen clips of Holly running, through the after doing a fist pump to the crowd, running to the hiding place, and that has not affected his PR very well. In fact, there's all kinds of memes of him running to the tune of Sir Robin from Monty Python and the Holy Grail and the rest, and it's not very flattering. So those were released, but again, that was in an open area where which is open to the public apparently. So it depends on what videos and what is Carlson having access to. And is he a security risk? He probably wouldn't deliberately get anybody killed, but does he even know? How does he know what is a secret tunnel versus a public tunnel versus a tunnel everybody's seen, or a hallway or whatever? I mean, but the fact that we're having this discussion and McCarthy just doesn't even seem to want to apologize for it, despite the fact that the Senate Republicans are at least privately on his case about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are very serious elements about this. Like you said, when Vice President Pence and his family were evacuated because their lives were at risk, and his head of security, as we know now from the January 6th committee, was calling through to the head of security at the, seated next to Trump and his chief of staff in his inner circle. He said, we're not doing what you said. This is Secret Service to Secret Service, or there are people who are no longer on, they're like special assignment Secret Service because of their details. He basically said, we're not going to do what you said because you would have him in Alaska. Basically, Pence's people knew that it was for all intents and purposes, at least a delay with the expectation of overturning the election, which is a coup. So it's, the stakes couldn't be higher when it comes to some of the elements of what's on those tapes. So I concede that, there are things that if they were reviewed or vetted properly, they would truly remain classified. But you could also imagine a scenario where, like you said, the January 6th committee presentation material was on CNN and MSNBC pretty regularly. And so that means that the sanitized release for public sort of curated versions of the videos or elements, pieces of the videos, excerpts, that maybe the Republicans do legitimately want to call into question some other way to view the day. And they could say, okay, well, yeah, we had these, this small percentage of what you saw this is a hypothetical, this small percentage of what you saw on January 6th is egregious and worse. But there are other things, there were people walking around. There were police that were moving barriers in some place. In theory. So in theory, there were some people who were walking around thinking this is kind of normal. This is kind of not terrible. So maybe the Republicans could conceivably come up with a video of their own where they say, okay, over here it was this, over there it was that. The that is a problem. The this is we just want to know. We want people to know, and not everybody who walked through that front door is a Proud Boy or one of these other organizations that Oath Keeper or an insurrectionist, so I could see some sunlight being a disinfectant that adds value, but the way that this is playing out, it's just more of that trench warfare that's really hard to defend.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans have only been in charge for a month. They definitely have not had time to vet 43,000 hours of video. It just hasn't happened. So again, they need to, well, you would think that they would have to be real open about what they've already given to Tucker Carlson, what access they've already given, but they're not going to be forthcoming in that because they know that the people who are going to be mostly concerned about this are not in their political constituency. There's people out there who wish some Congress people were hurt. It's just the way it is. We've got people who wanted the election to be overturned. I was debating with somebody on a forum, a Trumper, who 2 days before January 6th happened, January 4th, was saying, you think that Biden has won, you wait until January, till that date. It's and just wait, and you should go hiding, liberal. It was a really obnoxious thing, and I didn't take it very seriously. I was like, oh yeah, whatever. And then January 6th happened, and I've wondered since then, what did this person know? And how did they know it? I mean, probably off of the dark web and stuff that was all through there. It's not like it was a big secret, apparently. But it's just, but this is a real scary thing. And, but also maybe I've watched The Handmaid's Tale, shouldn't have watched that because in that, one of the scenarios for the coup is that people get in with guns and shoot most of the House members. This is before January 6th. So it's just it's a really chilling thing. But McCarthy ought to be transparent about it. What has he given up? What has been the vetting process? And, what are you going to give to the lawyers of the January 6th defendants and why?
Right. Right. And so I know that this is where you stand depends on where you sit is the old cliche here. But I just remember a lot of people that I talk to that are either non-political or tend to be conservative, tend to be Republican over the years, but no one who is like a diehard MAGA person or anything like that. And they kind of just said, how could this have been a good election, a valid election? Why would all these doubts be out there? Why would all the news be out there? I just don't understand. And so that suspension of disbelief or whatever, when people are saying like, I just maybe it's true that something bigger and nefarious is happening. So we do really need to point to that Dominion that Dominion legal case where we know with 100% certainty that Fox News, at the highest level, Murdoch himself, in his deposition, has said, I know that people on my staff misrepresented the truth. And we made this decision to continue to take, Mike Pillow's money. I forgot his last name, but people call him Mike Pillow.
Lindell.
Mike Lindell, there you go. That we continue to take his advertising, we continue to take his money, because that's how we work. We take advertising money. And so he kind of said the quiet part out loud. And he said, we were aware of the truth and we allowed non-truth to be out there. And then you go deeper and deeper into this and you say, well, if all the people who were the opinion leaders on those shows in the prime time were saying the election fraud thing is not accurate, we shouldn't let these people out there. Sure. But then they realized, oh, wait, it's going to potentially harm us financially so bad because of competition, because of Newsmax and One American Network, that we're going to continue this line. So
we discussed that because they were on the defensive after having called the Arizona race first.
Yeah. So now I know we just have the closing minutes and seconds here. The point is, that's the person that Speaker McCarthy gave all this to, was that news agency, and in particular Tucker Carlson is that person who was out there saying, fire the people who were telling the truth because our false narrative is our bread and butter. And that seems like that's a bridge too far.
You're talking about the guy who says himself, I'm not a journalist, I'm an entertainer. So why is that being given to an entertainer? It is just absolutely patent. And one of the things that you didn't mention, something we didn't make a whole topic of, but it turns out that the Attorney General in Arizona suppressed the conclusions and evidence that it was that the election was fine in Arizona, right? I mean, just deliberately suppressed it. Why is that person not being charged? I mean, it's a whole lot, or at least it's barred, assuming he's an attorney. But we are at the end of this topic. We have to move on, but this will probably come up again.
I'm sure.
Okay, last topic of the evening, the student debt relief that Biden pushed through and managed to get passed last fall is in jeopardy. It is at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court justices majority have expressed a lot of skepticism as to whether or not it was the debt relief is constitutional, because Biden did grant this relief without congressional authority. It was did it as a administrative action, and the question is the conservative justices have created a new doctrine known as the major questions doctrine, which is basically to suggest that an agency or an administrative aspect cannot interpret a law, go out on its own limb, interpreting the law and making the changes if it's something that would vastly have an impact on the country's politics, body politic. And I want to say that actually the woman. I'm trying to remember her name, representing Joe Biden, did an excellent job. I mean, really did a real good job of actually shutting a lot of that down. And legal scholars are saying she may have actually swayed a couple of the conservative justices, including Roberts. Her name, I'm trying to find.
I got it. It's Elizabeth Prelogar.
Yeah, however you say it. Prelogar. Attorneys are just saying she hit it out of the park, that the opposition was cocky. She may have hit it on issues of standing as to whether or not these states who've sued even have a harm that they can point to give them standing, even maintain this lawsuit. But the other thing is that this was an emergency provision. This was, if the Biden administration, under normal circumstances with normal justices, should be able to get up and say, we did this because it's in the emergency provisions. These students were clearly impacted by the pandemic, not able to earn money during that time. So this relief is tailored towards that emergency. There are experts saying that she may have swayed the two justices on that point, and that would be enough.
Yeah, so it's funny that we went, you did a little intro, and then you went straight to that most recent development from yesterday's oral arguments.
Right.
Because I think I read the same article as you, and I thought, wow, there's, or at least the same basic coverage, that in fact it was a very successful defense. Like you said, the key, one of the key issues here is standing. So do the plaintiffs have standing to even bring the case in front of the Supreme Court? And because there's no harm to them. So who's the them? The them is the 6 GOP-led states: Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, South Carolina, and also a co-plaintiff was it's called the Job Creators Network Foundation. which is, I think I saw it in Politico, is a conservative advocacy organization. Basically, that's how they were described. So were they harmed? And a lot of people are out there saying, probably not. They're probably not the best plaintiffs out there. Who's harmed? And it's in theory the
taxpayers.
Yeah, or the banks that might not get repaid, because some of this money is really owed directly to the U.S. government, or most of it is owed directly to the U.S. government. But the loan servicers get compensated based on the amount of loan that's going to get paid back. So then the question is, well, how much are we even talking about? And before we get to how much, I would say that it's like, what was the justification for this from the Biden administration, which I think is an important part, which you touched on. They're really pointing back to the HEROES Act of 2003 after September 11th, which allows the U.S. Secretary of Education to, quote, waive or modify, end quote, student loan programs to ensure borrowers are not left worse off because of a national emergency. So somebody in the White House made the determination that this was the angle they were going to go through. It's an emergency. Secretary of Education's name is on it with extraordinary powers during an emergency. And, these people, these students, their lives could be impacted horribly if during a national emergency they have to pay back their loans. So we can waive it, or we can delay it, which is what President Trump did at the time. He suspended payments. So he used the presidential authority, the executive power, to waive, and said, obviously if people aren't working and going out of the house, they don't have to pay their student loans. So now Biden he's taken that power and extended it a little bit further and said, we are going to means test and find, folks who fall within a certain economic range, that first 10,000 or that first 20,000, if they're qualified for Pell Grants, that we're going to forgive their debt. And so now the question is, how much are we talking about? People estimate it could be 25 billion to 50 billion a year over the next 10 years, which is $500 billion. So it's definitely affecting 43 million people. Right. So it's a huge amount of money. And so some people have sticker shock. And I think actually one of the justices even said,
Roberts,
a lot of money.
Roberts, yeah.
Roberts,
said that makes it a major question.
Yes. But then the answer from Solicitor General was, well, we have a $20 trillion economy. And when we have national programs that affect a group as large as all college students, we're going to be talking about a lot of money. So it's, yes, it's a lot of money, but we're talking about a lot of money here. So in a way, that combined with the fact that there was witness testimony from a top U.S. Department of Education official where they said debt cancellation policy is necessary to prevent a historic rise in delinquencies and defaults. We anticipate those defaults, delinquencies, and yes, we're considering it necessary to not have that outcome. Because one of the questions was, well, if it's not necessary, then it's not valid. And then so the question is, well, if you have, say, one option or two options or three options or four options, when is it necessary to pick one over the other? So it seems like semantics from the plaintiff side to argue whether or not it's necessary. If the the executive branch says, the official from the Department of Education says it's necessary, then if they say it's necessary, then indeed it may be necessary. So really, the question is getting back to your first point. Solicitor General did great, which may have swayed some people, but for context, we have a 6-3 court. We have 6 conservatives, 3 liberals, basically, and they have been shooting down executive power. Constraining executive power as a practice, similar to what you said with this major questions doctrine. They want to be Congress that grants that power, not the president. Well, the president is saying Congress did act. They gave us the HEROES Act of 2003. It was, that's where we got it from, and we were just piggybacking on the authority we were already given. But the courts have said, your arguments don't fly. When it came to climate change investments, they pared them back. When it came to vaccine requirements and large private employers, they scaled them back. when it
And
came.
the EPA actually is facing a challenge that'll be heard, I think, later in the year on whether or not they are empowered by Congress to control emissions that are related to climate change, because that's not considered a toxin or whatever that was originally anticipated by the law. It's not, and Congress hasn't changed the mission of the EPA or the Clean Air Act or any of that. So this is not going to end here one way or another. Even if Biden convinces a couple of justices to flip here, the executive power is going to be limited until there's a Republican president again. Then it'll probably be expanded again.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I'm glad you actually went down that road, because it really does. It just it shows that there is an economic element. I think it's called legal positivism. I know this is in the weeds, but Chicago Law School has some scholars, I think in like the 70s, where it came out of like Milton Friedman's capitalism, kind of capitalism and economics philosophy, where judges are historically, since the last 50 years, but also you could go all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century, like the Lochner Court, the switching time, the Save Nine, and all that. There's always been this economic element of their decision-making processes. So they have, and I'm not going to claim, go down that road of because they come from wealthy, privileged backgrounds. That's not the reason why they do it. The reason they do it is because that's the system we have. The system we have is that they take into account different economic outcomes and different. Why would we have a rule that says that the president could, for example, turn the EPA into somebody who's going to police carbon? That's a legit question. Well, same thing with vaccine requirements, bans on evictions, and now here, same thing with student debt relief. There's going to be a calculation about the impact, systemic impact on our overall economic structure. So that's where we are. And then the question is, and I'll throw this to you, I guess, given that the court is 6-3, given that they have this custom of, or at least the last year or two, this practice of being controversial, and I don't know what the right word is. It's not avant-garde, but they're being, they're cutting tradition left and right in the name of a new philosophy that is critical of regulatory structure here. Do you really think that this one person's great argument about standing is going, the Solicitor General's case about standing is going to sway anybody on the right, or do you think they're more likely to stick together and sort of continue down the same road they've been?
It's hard to say, because Roberts and Kavanaugh have actually broken from the majority at times, and one of the brilliant aspects of her argument is she was basically trying to present the long-term impact of this, the precedent that it establishes, that could make it much more difficult for a Republican president should they come to power, and on all kinds of things, because there's discretion in every law that Congress passes is given to the administration, every one of them. I'm actually concerned about the power that Congress has ceded to them, particularly in the War Powers Act and all of that. We don't even declare wars anymore. Congress has completely given that to the presidents. When they get around to declaring war, it's because the president has made it inevitable. So, I wouldn't mind some reining in, but she made the case that this would be going really far, and would have impacts that they don't anticipate. So I think you've got 4 purely result-oriented justices and 2 conservatives that might be more concerned about the long-term impact of it. So there is that. The other thing I want to comment on while we've got time is this $500 billion figure doesn't take into account the fact that part of the problem is that not all of this debt's going to be repaid there's going to be defaults. So how much of that is accounted for in there? What about the economic damage that it causes for people who can't invest in their future because they're saddled with this stuff, and including the late fees and everything else? How does that impact revenues? In terms of the overall economic impact, it's not, just so to come up with just that figure as to how much is lost in that doesn't take into account the economic benefits of it, of that, and what's offset and possibly even exceeded. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of economic development to make up for billions of dollars over the course of a decade. So it's really myopic to focus on that, and conservatives ought to know better, because they've got their Laffer curves and all of this kind of stuff that talk about if you raise taxes, it actually leads to less revenues. It turns out to be a joke. That's why Reagan had to switch from supply side to basically a massed Keynesianism back in the 1980s, and to create the best economy. But it's just, traditionally conservatives are better economists, and that is a completely myopic view. And I was surprised that Justice Roberts, who I think of the conservative justices is the most intelligent, quite frankly, and with the most depth, would say that.
Cool. No, I'm glad you went deep to come up with kind of, hey, it could happen this way. And then I think the one statement that was considered the most successful, kind of, let's really think about this, was the fact that if it's based on a congressional act, it's based on what we said, the HEROES Act of 2003. The purpose of that piece of that law that referenced the Department of Education was to, quote, make sure borrowers do not suffer financially because of their loans during a national crisis. So they were empowered. The executive branch was already empowered with the power to do this. And Solicitor General, what she said was that she basically made the case that this falls squarely in the intent of the law. So I think that really would make someone like you described, that make someone like Roberts really reflect and say, all hyperbole aside, all the political grandstanding aside, we need to let the government decide when it's a crisis, and we need to let them use the powers that have been enumerated. And it's not the case, really. We may not like the choice that they made. You could think of 1,000 other ways they could have done it, but this was the choice they made, and it probably was not unconstitutional. So I think there's an outside chance that happens, but it's a really outside chance.
Well, you got the last word on that. We'll see if it comes up again. Obviously, it'll come up again when the Supreme Court does issue its decision, but it's up in the air. Okay, Dave, predictions. What do you got?
Predictions. Well, let's keep it short and sweet. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, starts today and goes for the next 4 days. And it looks like this year it's a coronation attempt for Trump and his supporters, but there's some degree of resistance. If you look at the polling, Trump still has a significant, a decent lead over DeSantis and a huge lead over everybody else. DeSantis is avoiding the event entirely. He realizes that CPAC is the Donald Trump lane, and he's trying to tack a little bit outside of that. So my prediction here is that Donald Trump is going to accomplish what he intends to accomplish, which is to solidify his base, solidify his early lead, but that may not be enough for the head-to-head, because it's still a little bit too early for this to be a determinative reflection of his true support.
Well, I've got a prediction that's related to that. DeSantis actually has been ahead in polls when it's just him and Trump. but when other people are thrown in, he doesn't fare as well. And yes, there was that Fox News poll that had Trump ahead by basically 15 points, and that is problematic. I do believe that there's also concerns about DeSantis, that he's not quite as good a national candidate as they were hoping. He has not been interviewing well of late. In fact, there have been some Fox News interviews that have been really questionable as to whether or not he even knows his stuff. And that, when you get on the national stage, you got to be able to show that you know your stuff. Foreign policy appears to be very weak on. And on top of it, the book burning thing that we talked about last week is not playing well with moderates. And the what he just did to Disney is not playing well with the Club for Growth people. So DeSantis is not quite the superstar that people thought he was. He's going to have to declare soon because he's got to start raising some money, and there's a lot of questions about that. And so I believe he will declare. I believe that there'll be a rush of Senate Republicans who endorse him right away to try to give him that, because the Senate Republicans have suffered twice now. They've failed to retake, probably due to Trump more than anything else. So I believe that DeSantis is going to declare sometime this month, and that all the mainstream Republicans, McConnell, all of them, are going to jump on that bandwagon and endorse him. Not McCarthy, though. Well, that concludes this week. We will be back next week to talk national news, political news of the day. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.